The first crack in the foundation of my marriage appeared not with a bang, but with the soft, hesitant click of the front door. I was in the kitchen, wrist deep in flour, trying to knead the anxiety out of my body by baking a sourdough. The recipe was familiar, a ritual I shared with my husband, Leo. Or used to. Lately, his rituals seemed to involve longer hours at the office and a new evasive stillness in his eyes. The door clicked shut and I heard his voice, low and reassuring, followed by a higher, softer one I didn't recognize. I wiped my hands on my apron, a smile already forming, a fragile hope that he was home early for us. That hope shattered the moment I stepped into the living room. There stood Leo, his coat still on, his face a mask of grim resolve. And beside him a woman. She was pale, with large, luminous eyes that seemed to swallow the light in the room. One of her hands was tucked into the crook of Leo's arm, the other rested protectively on the distinct, gentle swell of her stomach. "Clara," Leo began, his voice too steady, too rehearsed. "This is Isabel. Isabel, my wife, Clara." The world tilted. The flour on my hands felt like a coating of ash. Isabel gave me a small, wavering smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's so kind of you to have me," she whispered, and the words felt like a preloaded bullet. The next 10 minutes were a blur of polite hell. Leo explained, his words carefully chosen, sanitized of their true horror. Isabel was his ex-girlfriend. She was pregnant. She had no one else. She was in a fragile state both emotionally and physically. He had, in a moment of what he called basic human decency, offered her our guest room for a while. The words echoed in the hollowed-out space where my heart used to be. He hadn't asked. He hadn't discussed. He had presented me with a fait accompli, a bomb disguised as a damsel in distress, and expected me to smile and offer her tea. That night, in the cold space of our king-sized bed, I finally found my voice. It was a raw, broken thing. "Leo, you brought your pregnant ex-girlfriend into our home." "Our home." He turned to me, his face etched with a frustration I found utterly galling. "Clara, what was I supposed to do? Leave her on the street? She has nowhere to go. The father is out of the picture. She's scared. And I'm not." The question hung in the dark between us. What about us? What about our marriage? It's insane, Leo. "It's temporary," he said, the words feeling like a flimsy bandage on a gaping wound. "It's just until she gets back on her feet. You're being selfish about this." Selfish. The word was a spark on the tinder of my grief. I was being selfish for not wanting to witness, day in and day out, the living, breathing evidence of my husband's life before me, a life that was now literally blooming under our roof. The silence that followed was absolute. A third occupant in our bed, colder and more present than Isabel in the next room. The days bled into a week, a grotesque parody of domesticity. Isabel was always there, a silent, weeping ghost in silk kimonos. She'd leave mugs of half-finished herbal tea on the coffee table, her scent, a cloying mix of jasmine and something unfamiliar, lingering in the hallways. Leo hovered around her, his concern a physical force. He'd fluff the pillows behind her back, his hand lingering a moment too long. He'd run out at odd hours to satisfy her sudden, specific cravings for pickles and ice cream, a ritual I'd once dreamed of sharing with him. I felt like a ghost in my own home, transparent and silent. My anger was a quiet, cold thing banked deep inside me. I stopped baking. The sourdough starter in the fridge, our shared project, withered and died. It was on one of these days, suffocating in the polite toxicity of my own living room, that I fled. I drove aimlessly, tears blurring the familiar streets until I found myself parked outside the old community arts center. It was a place from a different life, a life before Leo, when my dreams were painted in watercolors and not in the muted tones of a safe suburban future. I walked in, the smell of turpentine and clay a balm to my soul. And that's when I saw him. A figure hunched on a bench near the pottery studio, his posture screaming a pain I recognized intimately. As I drew closer, my breath caught in my throat. My Owen. Or he would have been in a different timeline. In university, he was the brilliant, brooding sculpture major who made every other boy look like a cardboard cutout. I'd carried a torch for him for 3 years, a quiet, hopeless crush he'd never seemed to notice. He was all sharp lines and dark intensity, his hands capable of creating breathtaking beauty from lumps of clay. But the man on the bench was a faded photograph of that memory. He was thinner, his face drawn and pale. One leg was stretched out stiffly in front of him, a heavy-duty walking boot encasing his foot and ankle. He was staring at his hands as if they'd betrayed him. "Owen," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He looked up, and for a moment, there was no recognition in his deep-set eyes. Then it flickered. "Clara? Clara from Hendrik's art history seminar." The fact that he remembered my name and the class sent a jolt through me. "Yeah," I managed. What happened?" A wry, pained smile touched his lips. "Fell off a scaffolding. My own stupid fault. Smashed up my ankle, tore a bunch of ligaments. The doctors say it's a miracle I didn't need surgery, but it's going to be a long haul." He gestured to the crutches leaning against the bench. "Can't drive. Can barely get up the stairs to my apartment. My studio's on the 3rd floor. It's a nightmare." He looked so lost, so defeated. And in that moment, looking at his broken body, I saw a reflection of my own broken spirit. An idea, reckless and undeniable, bloomed in my mind. It was the same insane, unilateral logic Leo had used, but it felt different. It felt like survival. "I have a guest room," I heard myself say, the words leaving my mouth before my brain could censor them. "It's on the ground floor. You could stay there. Until you're back on your feet." Owen stared at me, stunned. "Clara, I couldn't possibly." "I insist," I said, my voice gaining a strength I hadn't felt in weeks. It would be nice to have the company." I was bringing home my own wounded bird. It was a declaration of war, and I was finally ready to fight back. The drive back to the house with Owen was a silent, surreal journey. He sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his crutches wedged awkwardly in the footwell, staring out the window at the passing suburbs as if they were an alien landscape. My own heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a chaotic mix of terror and a strange, defiant exhilaration. I had lit the fuse. Now I was carrying the bomb back into the fortress. "It's a nice neighborhood," Owen said finally, his voice cutting through the thick silence. It was a neutral observation, a placeholder for all the unasked questions I knew were swirling in his head. "It is," I agreed, my tone equally neutral. "Quiet." I didn't add it was until a week ago. I pulled into the driveway, the familiar sight of our 2-story colonial with its manicured lawn now feeling like a stage set for a play I hadn't auditioned for. I killed the engine and took a deep breath. "Hey, so, Leo, my husband, he's home. And we have another guest. Isabel." Owen turned his head slowly to look at me. "Another guest?" "It's a long story," I said, the understatement of the century. "Just don't be surprised by anything." Getting him out of the car and up the front walk was a clumsy, slow-motion ballet. I carried his small duffel bag while he navigated the crutches, his jaw tight with concentration and pain. As I pushed the front door open, the scene that greeted us was a perfectly composed domestic photograph, designed to highlight my alienation. Leo was on the sofa, and Isabel was reclined at the other end, her feet, socked in cashmere I noted absurdly, were propped in his lap. He was reading aloud from a pregnancy book, his voice a low, soothing murmur. They both looked up as we entered. The photograph shattered. Leo's eyes went from me to Owen to the crutches and back to me. The confusion on his face morphed into dawning disbelief, then hardened into a cold, sharp anger. Isabel slowly drew her feet back, sitting up straighter, her eyes wide with a performative curiosity. "Clara," Leo said, his voice dangerously calm. "What's going on?" "Leo, Isabel, this is Owen," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. "An old friend from university. He's had an accident and can't manage the stairs to his apartment. He's going to be staying in the guest room for a while." The silence that followed was profound. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. "Staying," Leo repeated as if he'd never heard the word before. He stood up, his movements stiff. "You invited someone to stay? Without discussing it with me?" The hypocrisy was so breathtaking, it stole the air from my lungs for a second. I met his gaze, unblinking. "I was following the new household protocol. The one you established last week. It seems we're in the business of taking in strays." Isabel flinched, her hand going to her stomach. Leo's face flushed a dark red. "Can I speak with you? In the kitchen? Now." I turned to Owen, who looked like he wished the floor would swallow him whole. "The first door on the right down that hall," I said, gently pointing. "Make yourself at home." He gave a tight, grateful nod and began the slow, clunking journey down the hallway, escaping the line of fire. The moment the kitchen door swung shut behind us, Leo exploded. "What the hell are you thinking, Clara? Bringing some strange man into our house?" "He's not a strange man, he's Owen." "And what was your thought process, Leo? Bringing your pregnant ex-girlfriend into our bed, into our home?" "It's not the same thing," he hissed, leaning across the granite island. "Why? Because he's a man? Or because he's my friend? Explain the difference to me, Leo. I'm genuinely curious." He couldn't. I saw the logic trap slam shut around him. He sputtered, running a hand through his hair. "This is insane. You're being petty and vengeful." "No," I said, my voice cold. "I'm being compassionate. Just like you. I'm providing shelter for someone in need. Just like you. The only difference is I'm not pretending it's anything else." I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving him standing there, seething. The war was declared. The battle lines were drawn. The following days settled into a tense four-way stalemate. The house was divided into territories. The living room and main kitchen became a sort of demilitarized zone, often occupied by Isabel during the day, who would watch sentimental movies with a box of tissues beside her. Leo spent most of his time in his home office, emerging only to attend to Isabel's needs. My domain became the guest wing and the kitchen in the evenings. Caring for Owen was my rebellion, my purpose. The first time I helped him change the dressing on his ankle, it was a clinical, awkward affair. The bruising was a horrific palette of purples and greens, the swelling pronounced. "It's not pretty," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. "It's healing," I said, my voice soft. And as I carefully cleaned the area, my fingers gentle on his inflamed skin, I realized I was speaking to more than just his ankle. This act of care was healing something in me too. It was a counterbalance to the poison of Isabel's passive dependence. Owen was nothing like Isabel. Where she demanded attention with a sigh or a tear, he was fiercely independent, frustrated by his own helplessness. He hated the crutches, hated having to ask for a glass of water. His gratitude was gruff, embarrassed, and utterly genuine. One evening I brought him a tray with a bowl of homemade chicken soup and a slice of the sourdough I'd started baking again. He looked at it, then up at me, his dark eyes unreadable. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know." He took a spoonful of soup and a look of genuine pleasure crossed his face. "God, that's good. This is a world away from the frozen dinners I was surviving on." We started talking then, truly talking. Not the polite, strained chatter of the dinner table with Leo and Isabel, but real conversation. He told me about his work, the large-scale metal sculptures he was known for, the frustration of being physically cut off from his craft. I told him about my art, the watercolor landscapes I'd abandoned after college to pursue a more practical career in graphic design, a decision I now saw as the first of many slow compromises that had led me here. "You were always so good," he said, surprising me. "In Hendrik's class. Your use of light was intuitive. I remember a piece you did of the old campus bridge in the rain. It had a real melancholy beauty. He remembered my art." He'd noticed. The compliment coming from him felt like someone had lit a candle in a room I'd kept dark for years. It was during one of these conversations late one night that Leo appeared in the doorway. I was sitting on the armchair I'd pulled into Owen's room, and we were laughing about a particularly pretentious art critic we both despised. The laughter died in my throat when I saw Leo's face. He was still in his work clothes, his tie loosened, but his expression was tight, his eyes burning with a possessive jealousy I hadn't seen in years. "It's late," he said, his voice clipped. "Owen needs his rest. And so do you." The command in his tone was unmistakable. Owen looked down at his hands, the easy camaraderie of moments before evaporating. "I'll be the judge of when I'm tired, Leo," I said, but the spell was broken. I stood up. "Good night, Owen." "Good night, Clara. And thank you." As I followed Leo down the hall to our bedroom, the distance between us felt like a chasm. He didn't speak, but the air crackled with his fury. He had created this situation, but he couldn't stand the reflection he now saw in it. He had brought his past into our present, and in doing so he had given me the permission, the blueprint, to do the same. And he was only just beginning to understand what that truly meant. The silence in the house after Leo's command in the hallway was no longer just an absence of sound. It had texture, weight, and a sharp, metallic taste. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the first volley, where everyone is hunkered down, tending their wounds and planning their next move. My own move was a quiet, deliberate reclamation. The next morning I didn't make a pot of coffee for the whole house. I made one just for Owen and me, carrying 2 mugs down the hall. I didn't prepare the bland, easy-on-the-stomach meals Isabel preferred. I roasted vegetables with pungent garlic and sharp rosemary, foods that filled the house with robust, honest smells, a stark contrast to her faint, floral perfume. Leo watched it all from the periphery, a storm cloud contained within the walls of our home. I could feel his gaze on my back as I laughed with Owen in the kitchen, a real, unforced laugh that felt foreign on my tongue. I saw the way his jaw tightened when he saw me carrying a fresh set of towels to the guest room, or when he overheard us discussing the chiaroscuro techniques of Caravaggio. His possessiveness was a caged animal, pacing and growing hungrier. It finally broke free a few days later. I was in the kitchen helping Owen practice walking with a single crutch. His arm was slung over my shoulders for balance, my own arm wrapped firmly around his waist. We were a tangle of concentration and support, moving in slow, synchronized steps from the island to the table. It was physically intimate, yes, but it was an intimacy born of necessity and mutual respect, not passion. The front door slammed. Leo was home early. He stopped dead in the doorway to the kitchen, his briefcase dangling from his hand. His eyes locked onto where Owen's body pressed against mine, onto the way my fingers splayed against Owen's side to steady him. "What is this?" His voice was low, a dangerous rumble. Owen immediately tried to pull away, his face flushing with embarrassment, but I held him fast. "It's physical therapy, Leo," I said, my voice calm. "He's trying to learn to walk." "It doesn't look like therapy," he sneered, dropping his briefcase with a thud. "It looks cozy." "Well, it's not," Owen said, his voice tight. "Claire's just helping me. I'll go back to my room." He tried to move again, and this time I let him. He hobbled painfully back to his crutch and began the slow retreat down the hall, leaving me alone with the tempest that was my husband. "You humiliate him," I said, my voice cold. "And you humiliate me. Do you think I enjoy this? Do you think I enjoy having my life, my home, turned into a convalescent home for people from our past? That's different, and you know it," he shot back, stepping closer. "Isabel is vulnerable. She's carrying a child. He's a grown man, Clara. A man you clearly have a history with. Don't think I don't see the way you look at him." "And how do I look at him, Leo?" I challenged, crossing my arms. "With basic human decency? With compassion? Because that's the standard you set in this house, isn't it? Or does that standard only apply to your ex-lovers?" He was circling the kitchen island now, a predator trapped in his own domain. "This is not the same. Isabel has no one. She's alone. So is Owen. He's hundreds of miles from his family, he can't work, he can't even climb the stairs to his own bed. How is his isolation less valid than hers? Because she's pregnant? Is that the only metric for suffering that you recognize? He's manipulating you, Clara. Can't you see that? He's using this injury to get close to you." The absurdity of it was so profound I almost laughed. "You think this is a ploy? That he threw himself off a scaffolding and shattered his ankle on the off chance that I, a woman he hasn't seen in a decade, would happen to wander into that community center and offer him a place to stay? That's quite the long game, Leo. Maybe you've been reading too many of Isabel's melodramatic novels." His face was a mottled red. He was cornered, and he knew it. All his arguments were circular, collapsing under the weight of their own hypocrisy. I decided to drive the final nail in the coffin. I walked over to the counter, poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to him. The gesture was so mundane it threw him. "Let me make this simple for you," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, measured tone I'd used in business meetings to dismantle opposing arguments. "You have a person in this house who is vulnerable and needs your care. Correct?" He stared at me, suspicious. "Yes. And you believe it is your moral duty, your basic human decency, to provide that care. Correct. Clara, where are you going with this? Answer the question." "Yes," he bit out. "Good." I took a sip of my water. "I too have a person in this house who is vulnerable and needs care. I too feel a moral duty to provide it. So it seems we have a perfect symbiotic situation here. A win-win." He blinked. "A what?" "A win-win," I repeated, enunciating clearly. "You focus all your considerable compassion and attention on Isabel. Make sure she's comfortable, that her cravings are satisfied, that she feels safe and secure. And I will focus my attention on Owen. I will make sure he eats, that his injury is cared for, that he has company so he doesn't go stir-crazy. You get to be the hero for your friend and I get to be the hero for mine. It's the perfect arrangement. It solves all our problems. I watched the understanding dawn on his face, followed by horror. He saw it now with crystal clarity. He saw the grotesque mirror I was holding up. He saw that his noble sacrifice had given me the exact same license, and he hated the reflection. This isn't a business transaction, he sputtered. Isn't it? I asked softly. You made it one the moment you brought her here without my consent. You turned our marriage into a negotiation. I'm just accepting your terms. He opened his mouth then closed it. He had no retort. There was none. Every path of logic led back to his own actions. The hypocrisy was a cage of his own making and I had just locked the door. He stood there, breathing heavily, the untouched glass of water trembling slightly in his hand. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a dazed, furious impotence. He looked at me as if he was truly seeing me for the first time, not as his wife, Clara, the accommodating woman who baked sourdough and kept a tidy home, but as a strategist, an equal opponent who had just outmaneuvered him completely. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the kitchen. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, then the sound of his office door closing, a little harder than necessary. I leaned against the counter, my own knees suddenly weak. The adrenaline was receding, leaving me shaking. I had won the argument. I had exposed him. But the victory felt hollow and terrifying. I had just formalized the end of my marriage in a brutal, unflinching treaty. Our home was now officially a house divided, with two separate camps, two separate loyalties, and a chasm between us that felt for the first time truly irreversible. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was the silence of a new Cold War. And I had just fired the most powerful shot. The victory of my win-win declaration was a cold, metallic thing, leaving a taste of ashes in my mouth. I had won the argument, but the cost was the last fragile pretense of our marriage. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a tomb for the living, where 4 ghosts went through the motions of a life that had ended. In the days that followed, Leo's behavior underwent a subtle but seismic shift. It was as if my words had been a key, unlocking a part of his brain that had been willfully dormant. He didn't apologize. He didn't try to talk about it. Instead, he began to pull away from Isabel with a quiet, almost clinical detachment. I first noticed it on a Thursday morning. Isabel was perched on the living room sofa, her usual position, and let out one of her delicate, sighing coughs. A week ago, Leo would have been at her side in an instant, fetching water, feeling her forehead, his face a mask of concern. This time he was passing through on his way to the kitchen. He paused, glanced at her and said, "You should drink some tea," before continuing on his way. It was a simple, dismissive sentence, but it landed with the force of a thunderclap in the silent room. Isabel's eyes widened in genuine surprise, then narrowed with something that looked like calculation. Later, when she mentioned a craving for mangoes, a fruit that was out of season and required a trip to a specialty market across town, Leo simply nodded from behind his laptop. Maybe later. I have a lot of work to catch up on. The maybe later never came. He was, for the first time, seeing her not as a damsel in distress, but as a responsibility he had rashly undertaken. A responsibility that was now inconvenient, especially since I had so neatly mirrored it back at him. His care became perfunctory, wrote. He still ensured she had meals, but he no longer asked if she wanted anything specific. He was present, but his attention, the intense, focused concern that had so infuriated me, had evaporated. It was being redirected and I could feel the heat of it aimed at me. Because while he was withdrawing from Isabel, he was hyper-focused on Owen and me. His jealousy became a silent, observant presence in the house. If I spent 20 minutes in Owen's room, Leo would find a reason to walk past the door 3 times. If Owen and I shared a joke in the kitchen, Leo would appear, his expression neutral but his eyes missing nothing. One evening I was in the garden cutting some late-blooming roses. The evening air was cool, a relief from the stifling atmosphere inside. I heard the patio door slide open and turned to see Leo. He stood for a moment, his hands in his pockets, watching me. "They're your favorite," he said, his voice quiet. The David Austins. I snipped a particularly perfect peach-hued bloom. They are. He took a few steps closer. I remember when we planted them. You said you wanted a garden that smelled like heaven. He was trying to summon a ghost, the ghost of us. The memory was a sharp, sweet pain. I did, I said, not looking at him. I miss that, Clara, he said, his voice thick. I miss us. I miss coming home to you, just you. I miss the quiet. I finally turned to face him. The setting sun cast his face in a warm, golden light, making him look like the man I'd fallen in love with. But the illusion was thin, like a veneer over something rotten. You ended that quiet, Leo, I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled around the rose stems. You brought the storm inside. You can't now complain about the rain. It was a mistake. The words burst from him, raw and desperate. A colossal, idiotic mistake. I see that now. I was trying to do the right thing and I was blind to how it would hurt you. But I see it now. Can we just send them both away? Send her to a nice maternity home, get him a home health aide and just start over. It was what a part of me, the weak, nostalgic part, had desperately wanted to hear for weeks. But it was too late. The foundation was not just cracked. It was pulverized. You don't get to unmake this decision, Leo, I said softly. You don't get to tidy it away now that it's become inconvenient for you. You made your choice. I've made my peace with the consequences. And one of those consequences is Owen. I won't throw him out because you've suddenly realized you preferred our life before you blew it up. His shoulders slumped. So that's it? You've replaced me with him. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Is that what you think this is? A replacement? You think this is about me choosing another man? Leo, this is about me choosing myself. Owen isn't my lover. He's my friend. He's a reminder that I was a person before I was your wife. A person with passions and a life that didn't revolve around the temperature of your coffee or the state of your laundry. You brought Isabel here and showed me that my feelings, my comfort, my home were all negotiable. Caring for Owen has shown me that they're not. The truth of my words hung between us, stark and undeniable. I saw the understanding finally, truly dawn in his eyes. This wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't a power play to force him to send Isabel away. This was a fundamental realignment of my soul. I had stepped out of the role of Leo's wife, and back into the skin of Clara. I turned back to my roses, the conversation clearly over. I heard him stand there for a long moment, his breath a soft sigh in the twilight, before the patio door slid shut again. When I came back inside, my arms full of fragrant blooms, I went straight to Owen's room. He was propped up in bed, sketching in a notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration. For you, I said, placing the bouquet in a vase on his nightstand. To brighten up the room. He looked from the flowers to my face, his keen artist's eyes missing nothing. You okay? He asked quietly. I thought of Leo's desperate plea, his hollow realization, the ghost of our past he'd tried to summon. I looked at Owen, at his quiet strength and his refusal to be a victim. I thought of the self I was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding. I will be, I said, and for the first time I truly believed it. The tide had turned. Leo was finally fighting for our marriage, but he was fighting for a ghost. I was no longer the woman he was trying to win back. I was already gone, and in her place was someone newer, stronger, and far less forgiving. The new equilibrium was a fragile, tense thing. Leo's attempts to rekindle our past felt like someone trying to light a fire with wet wood. All smoke and no warmth. He'd suggest watching our favorite movie, but the silence afterward was heavier than any dialogue. He'd cook my favorite meal, but it tasted of ash and obligation. Every gesture was a desperate plea to a version of me that no longer existed, and his frustration grew in direct proportion to my stillness. His focus, once split between work and Isabel, was now almost entirely trained on the space between Owen and me. It was a possessive, simmering attention that made the air in the house feel thin and charged. The win-win arrangement I had so coolly proposed was now a prison of his own making, and he was rattling the bars. The breaking point came on a Saturday. Owen's ankle had improved enough that he could hobble short distances with just a cane. A small, hard-won victory. To celebrate, I decided to make him a proper Italian feast, a far cry from the bland, healthy food we'd all been subsisting on. I spent the afternoon in the kitchen making fresh pasta, simmering a rich ragu, the windows steaming up with the warmth and life that had been absent for so long. I set the small kitchen table for two with a checkered cloth and a candle. It wasn't romantic. It was a deliberate act of creating a space that felt separate from the gloom of the rest of the house. Owen maneuvered into his chair, a genuine easy smile on his face. "This smells incredible, Clara. You didn't have to go to all this trouble." "It's no trouble," I said, and I meant it. For the first time in months, cooking felt like a creative act, not a domestic chore. It's nice to cook for someone who appreciates it. We ate and we talked. We talked about art, about a new exhibition at the Modern Art Museum, about the ridiculousness of abstract expressionism versus its profound beauty. It was lively, intellectual, and real. We were laughing, a full-bellied, unself-conscious laugh about a pretentious sculptor we both knew when Leo walked in. He had taken Isabella out for a brief, obligatory walk. They stood in the doorway, coated in the chill of the evening, and took in the scene. The intimate table for two, the empty wine glasses, the candlelight flickering on our animated faces. The contrast between the warmth in the kitchen and the cold they brought in with them was absolute. Isabel looked between us, a faint, knowing smirk playing on her lips before she manufactured a look of delicate fatigue. "I'm so tired, Leo. I think I need to lie down." But Leo wasn't listening to her. His eyes were locked on me, on the smile that was still fading from my lips. He saw the relaxed set of my shoulders, the light in my eyes that he hadn't been able to ignite in weeks. He saw a version of me that was alive, a version that belonged not to him but to this moment in this kitchen with this other man. The careful control he'd been maintaining shattered. "Get out." The words were low, guttural, directed at Owen. The laughter died in my throat. Owen's face went carefully blank. "Leo," he began, his voice calm. "I said get out of my house." Leo roared, taking a step forward. His fist slammed down on the counter, making the plates rattle. The violence of the gesture was a shockwave. "You think I don't know what you're doing? You think I don't see you sitting there eating my food in my home, smiling at my wife? Leo, that's enough." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the tile. "Is it?" He turned his fury on me, his eyes wild. "Is it enough, Clara? Because it seems like it's just beginning for you too. Look at this. A candlelit dinner, while I'm out there dealing with the mess I made. You're rubbing my face in it. There is no you too." I shot back, my own anger rising to meet his. "We were having dinner. Something that normal people do. Something we haven't done in months. You're the one who made this mess, Leo. You don't get to be angry that I'm not wallowing in it with you." "It's my house," he shouted, the argument devolving into something primal, territorial. "It's our house." I screamed back, the dam of my composure finally breaking. "Or it was. Before you turned it into a halfway house for your past. You gave up the right to call it just yours when you moved your pregnant ex-girlfriend into the guest room without so much as a conversation." The word pregnant hung in the air, a stark, ugly reminder of the original sin. Isabel, who had been watching the scene with a kind of detached fascination, now placed a hand on her stomach, a classic manipulative gesture. Leo saw it, and it seemed to fuel his rage further. "So this is your solution? You replace me? You think this cripple is a better option?" The word was a slap. Owen flinched as if physically struck. He slowly, painfully pushed himself to his feet, leaning heavily on the table. His face was a mask of dignity and pain. "Don't you dare," I whispered, my voice trembling with a cold, pure fury. "Don't you dare speak to him that way. You who preaches about decency and compassion. You're a hypocrite, Leo. A pathetic, jealous hypocrite." I looked at him, really looked at him. At the man standing red-faced and trembling in the wreckage of our life, hurling insults at an injured man because he couldn't bear the consequences of his own actions. The last thread of hope, the last fragile filament that had somehow, impossibly, still connected me to him, snapped. The anger drained out of me, replaced by a vast, desolate calm. It was over. Truly, finally over. In the ringing silence, my voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a shard of ice. "That's it," I said. Leo was still breathing heavily, his chest heaving. "What's it?" "This. All of it. I'm done." I looked at him and I felt nothing. No anger, no pain, just a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. "I want a divorce." The words landed not with a bang but with a soft, final thud. The fight went out of Leo instantly. The red drained from his face, leaving him pale and gaunt. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape as if he couldn't process the words. What? He breathed. You heard me, Leo. I want a divorce. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. A simple, unchangeable truth as solid and real as the ground beneath our feet. I had reached the end and there was nothing left to say. I turned my back on him, my heart a still, cold stone in my chest, and began to clear the plates from the table. The celebration was over. The war was too. There was only the aftermath now. The word, divorce, seemed to hang in the air long after the sound of my voice had faded, a permanent stain on the atmosphere of the house. For a moment, there was absolute silence, broken only by the soft, retreating tap of Owen's cane as he discreetly left the kitchen, granting us a terrible privacy. Leo remained frozen in the doorway, a statue of shock and denial. The next few hours were a blur of quiet movement. I didn't look at him. I methodically cleaned the kitchen, scrubbing the pot from the ragu until it shone, wiping down every surface with a clinical thoroughness. It was a way to keep my hands from shaking, to keep the vast empty calm from swallowing me whole. He just stood there watching me until finally I heard his footsteps retreat up the stairs. The next morning he was a ghost of the furious man from the night before. He looked haggard, his eyes red-rimmed. He found me in the living room where I was drinking coffee and staring out at the rain-soaked garden. Clara, he began, his voice raspy. Last night what I said, I didn't mean any of it. I was angry. I was insane with jealousy. You can't throw away 10 years over a stupid fight. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was no longer a conversation. It was a post-mortem. It wasn't one fight, Leo. It was the final one. The last in a long series of choices you made that ended us. Bringing Isabel here was the big one, but last night, that was just you showing me the man you've become. I don't like that man. He's not me, he insisted, desperation clawing at his words. He came and knelt in front of my chair, a gesture that once would have melted my heart. Now it just felt theatrical. The real me is the man who planted those roses with you. The man who stayed up all night with you when you had the flu. The man who held your hand at your father's funeral. That's me, Clara. Remember us? Remember that couple who fought the world together? He was trying to summon our greatest hits, the curated memories meant to prove our love was real. And they were real. But they were also past tense. I remember, I said, my voice soft but unyielding. I remember that couple. But that couple is gone. You killed them when you decided your ex-girlfriend's comfort was more important than your wife's sanity. He flinched as if struck. It was a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. I'll fix it. I'll make it right. He stood up abruptly, a new, frantic energy in his movements. I'll fix it right now. He turned and almost ran from the room. I heard him taking the stairs 2 at a time. A cold dread settled in my stomach. What did fixing it mean to him now? 15 minutes later he was back downstairs, a jacket on. Isabel was behind him, her face pale and confused, clutching a small overnight bag. We're going to the hospital, Leo announced, his voice tight. My blood ran cold. What? Is she okay? She's fine, he said, not looking at Isabel. But she needs more care than we can give her here. It's not fair to her or to us. I'm going to check her in. They can monitor her and the baby there. It's for the best. It was a breathtakingly cruel and cowardly solution. He was trying to surgically remove the problem, to erase his mistake in the most clinical way possible. He wasn't thinking of Isabel's well-being. He was thinking of his crumbling marriage. He was offering me her head on a platter, believing that if he just made her disappear I would forget the betrayal, the humiliation, the weeks of emotional torture. Isabel stared at him, her eyes wide with genuine shock and a flicker of fear. This was not part of her script. She was supposed to be the fragile center of his universe, not a piece of inconvenient evidence to be disposed of. I looked from his desperate, determined face to her terrified one, and I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated disgust. No, I said, the word flat and final. Leo stopped, his hand on the front door. What? You are not taking her to the hospital because you've had a marital spat. That is monstrous, Leo. She is a person, not a piece of furniture you can return. You made a commitment to her. You told her this was a safe place. You don't get to revoke that because I've finally had enough. Isabel was watching me now, her expression unreadable. There was no gratitude, just a sharp, assessing look. But you said, Leo sputtered, utterly bewildered. I'm doing this for you. For us. There is no us, I said, standing up. My calm was gone, replaced by a righteous fury. Don't you understand? This isn't about Isabel anymore. Throwing her out doesn't change anything. It just makes you the kind of man who abandons a pregnant woman at the first sign of trouble. It makes you worse. The problem was never just her being here, Leo. The problem was you bringing her here. The problem was your arrogance, your disrespect, your complete and utter failure to protect our marriage. You can't fix that by making her the sacrificial lamb. The damage is done. He stood there by the door, deflated. The grand, desperate gesture had failed spectacularly. He had misread me completely. He thought I wanted Isabel gone. What I wanted was a husband who would never have considered bringing her here in the first place. And that man was a ghost. He slowly lowered Isabel's bag to the floor. She took a hesitant step back, her gaze darting between us like a cornered animal sensing a shift in the dynamics of its cage. Leo's shoulders slumped in utter defeat. He had played his last card, his most drastic move, and it had not only failed, it had revealed a deeper flaw in his character. I looked at him, this stranger I had promised my life to, and I knew there was nothing left. The divorce, Leo, I said, my voice echoing in the hollow space. It's not a negotiation. It's a decision. My decision. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the foyer with the woman he'd chosen over our marriage, and the devastating realization that there was no going back. The reckoning was over. He had lost. The week that followed was a study in silence. Leo moved through the house like a phantom, his presence reduced to the sound of a closing door or the faint scent of his cologne in the hallway. The grand, performative gestures had stopped. The desperate pleas had died in his throat. My declaration of divorce had become an immutable fact, a wall he could no longer scale. He began sleeping in his office, a tacit acknowledgement of the new reality. Isabel too had changed. The constant, performative vulnerability had vanished, replaced by a watchful, calculating stillness. With Leo's attention withdrawn, the engine of her presence had stalled. She spent more time on her phone, her fingers flying across the screen, her expressions hidden. The house felt different without the tension of Leo's jealousy and Isabel's manipulations. It was simply empty, a shell waiting to be vacated. It was this very emptiness that finally forced the truth to the surface. Leo's grandmother, Eleanor, arrived unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon. She was a formidable woman in her 80s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a loyalty to family that was both her strength and her blind spot. She had always adored Leo and by extension had been kind to me. Clara, darling, she said, sweeping into the living room and embracing me. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Leo called me. He's distressed. He says you're talking about divorce. She held me at arm's length, her gaze searching my face. Over this girl. This Isabel. Before I could answer, Isabel herself glided into the room, her radar for drama evidently still active. Hello, she said, offering Eleanor a sweet, fragile smile. You must be Leo's grandmother. He speaks so highly of you. Eleanor's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. She gave Isabel a curt nod before turning back to me. I've told Leo he was a fool. A noble fool perhaps, but a fool nonetheless. But to end a marriage over a moment of misguided chivalry, Clara? Is that really the answer? I was tired. Tired of defending my position, tired of explaining the profound violation. It wasn't a moment, Eleanor. It was a choice. And it revealed a fundamental disrespect that I can't unsee. Just then Isabel's phone, which she had placed on the coffee table, lit up with an incoming call. The screen flashed brightly and on it, clear as day, was a name and a photo, Liam Redhart. The photo was of a handsome, smiling man, his arms wrapped around a beaming, very pregnant Isabel. It was not an old picture. The room froze. Isabel snatched the phone up, her face draining of all color. Eleanor, who had seen the screen, let out a soft, disgusted humph. But it was Leo who reacted most profoundly. He had entered the room unnoticed, drawn by the voices. He stood stock still, his eyes locked on the phone now clutched in Isabel's white-knuckled hand. Liam, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Your ex-boyfriend? The one who abandoned you? The one who wanted nothing to do with the baby? Isabel stammered. It's It's not what it looks like. He's just checking in. With a heart next to his name? I asked, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening finality. He didn't abandon you, did he? This was all a game. You were playing him and Leo against each other. Or you had a fight and you ran to Leo to make Liam jealous. The sheer, manipulative audacity of it was staggering. Leo took a step toward her, his face a mask of dawning, horrified comprehension. All of it? The tears? The, I have nowhere to go? The, I'm all alone? It was a lie. The dam broke. Under the combined weight of our stares, my cold contempt, Eleanor's sharp disapproval, and Leo's shattered disbelief, Isabel's facade crumbled. The vulnerability evaporated, replaced by a defensive, spiteful hardness. You were so easy, Leo, she spat, her voice losing its soft, breathy quality. So desperate to be the hero, to prove you were a better man than Liam. You never even asked for his side. You just lapped up my story and brought me right into your perfect little home. It was pathetic. The air rushed out of Leo as if he'd been punched. He physically recoiled, stumbling back a step. He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a victim but as the architect of his ruin. You used me, he whispered, the words thick with shame. You used me to destroy my marriage. You destroyed it yourself, I said, my voice flat. I felt no triumph, only a profound weariness. She just handed you the matches. The truth, now exposed, was uglier than I had imagined. It wasn't just an affair of the heart. It was a cold, calculated manipulation. Leo had been a pawn and our marriage had been the collateral damage. Eleanor placed a hand on Leo's arm. Come, Leonardo, she said, her voice heavy with disappointment. There is nothing more for you here. She led her shattered grandson from the room. He went without a word, his head bowed, the full weight of his idiocy finally crushing him. Isabel stood alone in the center of the room, her secret revealed, her power gone. She looked at me, and for a fleeting second I saw the scared, lonely girl she probably was underneath all the lies. But it was too late for sympathy. I think you should pack, I said. I'll call you a cab. You can go to Liam or a hotel or wherever it is you actually have to go. She didn't argue. She simply turned and walked upstairs, her shoulders slumped in genuine defeat this time. I walked to the window, watching the rain. The great, poisonous lie at the center of this nightmare had been pulled into the light. Leo was vindicated in his poor judgment, but it was a hollow vindication that came at the cost of everything. The consequences were absolute. The truth had set no one free. It had only cemented our prison sentences. He was condemned to the knowledge of his own gullibility, and I was released finally and completely from any lingering doubt. The path ahead was bleak, but it was for the first time clear. In the weeks that followed the exodus of Isabel, the house became a different kind of quiet. It was no longer the tense silence of a standoff, but the hollow, echoing quiet of a place being slowly emptied of its history. Leo had moved out, renting a sterile apartment downtown, a penance I assumed for his sins. The divorce papers, a stark stack of legalese, sat on the kitchen counter, awaiting my signature. I found myself staring at them for minutes at a time, the finality of the act a cliff I wasn't quite ready to jump from. My days, however, were no longer defined by his absence. They were defined by a slow, deliberate reconstruction. With Owen's ankle steadily improving, our dynamic shifted from caregiver and patient to collaborators in a shared, quiet life. He had set up a temporary studio in the sunroom, his crutches traded for a single elegant cane. The air was filled with the scent of turpentine and the soft scratch of his charcoal on paper, sounds that felt creative and alive, not oppressive. He was working on a new series, smaller pieces than his usual monumental sculptures. One was a twisted, beautiful form in reclaimed wood and bronze, a clear metaphor for healing from a break. He never spoke of Leo or Isabel, but his presence was a constant, gentle reminder that a person could be shattered and still create something new from the pieces. One afternoon, I dragged my old watercolor set out from the back of a closet. The dried paints in their little porcelain wells looked like forgotten jewels. I sat up at the kitchen table, the good light streaming in, and tried to paint the roses in the garden. My hand was stiff, the colors muddy at first. Owen hobbled over, looked at my frustrated attempts, and without a word, showed me a trick with the brush to capture the delicate edge of a petal. It was a small thing, but it was a connection not of shared trauma but of shared passion. We were no longer two wounded birds huddled together for warmth. We were two artists tentatively reminding each other how to fly. Leo, to his credit, did not disappear. His attempts to win me back changed. The grand, desperate gestures were gone. Instead, he began a campaign of quiet, consistent presence. He didn't call or text me with pleas. He started showing up on Saturday mornings to tend to the garden we had planted together. He'd arrive without fanfare, work in silence for a few hours, weeding, pruning, caring for the David Austin roses, and then leave. The first time I watched him from the window, my arms crossed, waiting for him to come to the door. He never did. He began leaving things in the mailbox. Not love letters, but artifacts. A faded ticket stub from the first movie we saw together. A photograph of us, young and laughing on a hiking trail. A mix CD I'd made him in college, labeled in my sloppy handwriting. He was no longer arguing with me or trying to logic me into staying. He was simply, quietly reminding me of the man he used to be, the man I had fallen in love with. It was a smarter, more painful strategy because it wasn't a strategy at all. It felt like an apology in actions, not words. One evening he rang the doorbell. Owen was in the sunroom and I was in the kitchen. I opened the door to find Leo standing there, holding a single perfect peach rose from our garden. He looked older, more grounded. "Hi," he said, his voice soft. "Hi. I'm not here to ask for anything," he said, handing me the rose. "I was just pruning and this one was too beautiful not to cut. I thought you might like it." I took it. The scent was heavenly, just as I'd always said. "Thank you." He nodded, his hands shoved in his pockets. "The garden's looking good. The lavender is coming back." I noticed. He met my eyes then, and the raw need was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sorrow. "I'm sorry, Clara. For all of it. Not just for Isabel, but for forgetting us. For forgetting you." It was the first real, unqualified apology he had offered. It didn't change the past, but it settled something in the present. "I know," I said softly. He nodded again, turned and walked back to his car. I closed the door, the rose in my hand. I walked into the kitchen and found a vase. As I filled it with water, I looked through the doorway into the sunroom. Owen was watching me, his expression thoughtful but not jealous. He gave me a small, understanding smile before turning back to his work. That's when I understood the delicate balance we had found. My life was no longer defined by a single, failing relationship. It was a complex equation. On one side was Owen, representing my rediscovered self, my art, a future built on mutual respect and shared passion. On the other was Leo, representing a deep, complicated past, a love that had been real but had faltered, and a man who seemed to be genuinely, humbly trying to change. The divorce papers remained unsigned on the counter. I wasn't staying out of hope or weakness. I was staying because for the first time I had the power. I was the one who got to decide. My life had improved immeasurably. I was painting. I was laughing. I had a friend who saw the artist in me. And I had a husband who was finally, belatedly learning to see his wife. The future was a blank canvas and I was no longer afraid of it. I would sign the papers when and if I decided it was the right step for me. Until then, I would live in this new quiet power, tending to my garden, my art, and my own heart, letting the delicate balance hold for as long as it needed to. The limbo wasn't a prison. It was a period of grace, and it was entirely mine. The end.